And I think that's the same with anything else. And that's why I don't study the Bible or spend my time doing all that, because I'd much rather hang out with God and hang out with the living word rather than try and fathom out the written word, which I don't understand a lot of in reality, because most of it wasn't written for me. But my relationship with God was designed for me.
Mike, Lindy talked when she was there about stepping into her celestial body, if I understood her correctly. She talked about her new body, I guess, in heaven, or spiritual body.
Yeah.
I guess, each day. And I was just kind of curious about that, and your experience or thoughts on that. And the other thing, I guess, we talked last week, we touched a bit on control versus lordship, and that really is what I really thought about that more and more. Such a huge difference that it's always, you want to give God control over your life, but it's no, you want lordship, because that prevents the creativity, I guess, within you, and you going out and flowing in Him. Maybe you could talk about that for a moment. Because all the way it's like, God, I give you everything, control, and that's what we're trying to look at. Tell me to do this, tell me to do that, like a robot. It's all like that.
Yeah, I think in terms of the issue of that, He wants to work with us in relationship, in cooperation, in partnership. He may be the senior partner, but in the sense where he's invested in us. So He's invested in our sonship, and He wants us to mature, to begin to think like Him, then act like Him, because we are close to His heart. So this cardiogenosis type, heart to heart, knowing His heart, sensing His heart, feeling His heart, and then that being the motivation for what we do, comes out of a love relationship, not out of a fear relationship or a control relationship. So yeah, I think the wrong view of God promotes the wrong view of what surrender is. Surrender is a good thing. It's just saying, hey, I don't want to do anything that's outside of the intimacy of this relationship, which is going to in any way hinder this relationship. Therefore, I surrender my rights to do it independently of you. That's really what surrender means. It's not like I give up. It's because I'm not giving up. I'm engaging in something actively, but I'm not doing it from an independent position. So the surrender is the surrender of my right to independence. Now, that doesn't mean God takes away my right to independence. It's me just saying, hey, when I do that, it didn't work too well for me. So I would rather not do something without reference to our relationship. So Adam walked with God, and that walking relationship was a relationship which unveiled the Father's heart, and Adam outworked the Father's heart. And he was trusted to outwork the Father's heart until he chose to then follow his own path and disconnected from the walk, and got into the works, and that's the thing. So, I think some of it's the semantics that are connected to religion and therefore legalism. And we can use words that I think are an indication that our mindsets are still stuck in that legalistic way of thinking. And so when it comes to, control, well, we have a negative view of control. And our view of control is you are controlled into doing something you don't really want to do. But actually, when God is in control, it just means that His overall kingdom government is working and we're within it, but I wouldn't use the word control just because I think there are negative connotations to it, which people would pick up. So I'd much rather use the word surrender. And the lordship is just, I recognize my position within relationship to Him. And I'm a son and He's my dad. But He's a dad who knows way, way more than I do. And I respect and honor that He knows more than I do, but He's trying to communicate what He knows to enable me to do what He wants me to do But what he wants me to do is do that as a son, not as a slave, a steward, or in any way as a fixed, rigid, you've got to do it this way. And I think when we find that place of intimacy, of rest, peace, we find we're not looking for the one right way to do anything. We're just expressing what we know to be the Father's heart in a creative way, which aligns to how he made us. So the more we are us, the easier it is just to outwork being us without having to try and think about, am I going to get this wrong? What if I get it wrong? All of those negative mindsets that come with the, if I get it wrong, there is a consequence. Rather than, here's an opportunity of, in this amazing relationship, of outworking my sonship to fulfill God's heart. And there are infinite possibilities of doing that. And he's happy with all of them. You know, and if I'm happy with all of them, then it takes all the stress of, I've got to get it right. I've got to get it right. Or I mustn't get it wrong. You know, and for most people, that means they don't do anything because they're afraid of getting it wrong. Or when they do something, they're not free to do it in a way which expresses themselves. They're always looking for the rigid way of doing it, which means they're safe. So you look at the law, and the law had all sorts of ceremonial and civil and legal things within it. But because they were so afraid of getting the law wrong, they put all these other boundaries around the law to make sure they didn't get it wrong, which was their legalistic outworking of their own law-based system, because they developed the system, came through Moses, the law came through Moses, but even that wasn't enough for them to feel safe from this angry God who demanded stuff from them as they thought. And so they put a whole lot of other restrictions around. So the law might say, well, you can't walk more than, you know, a mile on a Sabbath or whatever. Oh, well, if we put 10 miles, then we'll guarantee not to do the 1 mile. So no one is allowed to do any walking at all, basically. Or, you know, it's that type of thing. You know, so if you sort of look at it that perspective, often people are looking for the right way because then they feel safer. And that is not creative. And that's not God, how God wants us to be. You know, he wants us to be free to be us within the confines of a relationship, which is a safety place for us to be us, because he's encouraging us and supporting us and helping us in that process. He's not there to micromanage us. You know, and that I think is what religion is. It's micromanagement. And legalism is an outworking of micromanagement, in that everything is a legalistic approach to it. So you've got to cross every T and dot every I and make sure everything's in its absolutely perfect place. And that's really just not what God's like. So, you know, I think the more we come into intimacy and know the heart of the Father, the more free we get. You know, and we're not free to do anything we might want to do from the soul's perspective in independence, but we're free to do anything which is in alignment with the heart of God, which should be our heart when we're close to him. You know, when I'm close to his heart, why would I want to do anything that contradicts what I know his heart is? Because I know his heart for me is going to be wanting the best, and for creation itself wanting the best. And all those mindsets contradict the view of God, you know, that we've had in the past, which I think has hindered us being free. You know, so I think that would be my whole perspective on the whole thing of lordship. It's me acknowledging him, not him forcing that on me. And that's the difference. You know, he's not forcing anything on me. I voluntarily surrender to be in that relationship and to see it that way, of a heart-to-heart fellowship type thing. You know, so the celestial body thing, I think, again, it's semantics. Lindy and I are very different in our approaches to things, but we're in very good relationship because we realize that we get to the same place in the end, but we take different routes and we have different ways of expressing it. You know, she would frustrate me no end if I was to talk to her as someone saying, well, how do you do that? Well, I just do it. Well, for me, that just wouldn't work. It was just like, but how do you do it? Well, I don't know. I just do it. You know, I just step into it. I just do it, you know, and she teaches people just to do it, you know, but I want to know how to do it, because some people can't just do it. Now, the people that gravitate around her are people who just go with the flow and do it, you know, whereas the people sort of gravitate around me are more people who would like to know how and how to explain it, so that those who can't just do it may have a bit more of an insight into things they might do to help them do it. So we have different sorts of approaches, which is fine because people are different, we're different, but we're really good friends, you know. And when we hang out, we just hang out and stuff happens, you know. You know, we could have come to a conclusion to things. And it's like, how did we get there? Oh, I don't know. We were just talking and we ended up getting to there. And we thought, oh, that would be great. Let's do that. You know, so we're very relational in how we do things. When talking about stepping into a celestial body, I don't even think of that concept. In one sense, I don't even sure what that concept is. But if in any way it is engaging in the realm of heaven or in the realm of eternity, whatever other dimensional perspective, and in that realm as a spirit being, taking on the identity of that spirit being, and then our whole being coming into alignment with who we are and where we are in heaven, then I would see that as what I would do. Now, if you're talking about the full perspective that God created us to be, that would be immortal, then the perspective of living in that immortal spiritual state should have an outworking on the physical state. And I think that, you know, the more we're in that realm, the more that realm should affect this realm. And therefore, the more that's flowing from that realm into this physical realm through us and in us should have a positive effect in bringing health and wholeness, and so that we take on that immortality. We don't need to die. You know, so, you know, is the celestial body just talking about, is it talking about, well, the resurrection body that Jesus had, which seemingly could be different from the body he had before? Maybe that's sort of part of a celestial. Well, I don't want to die, so I don't particularly want a resurrection, actual resurrection body, as in I've got to die to get it. So is there a sense where God's design and God's desire that we would be all that we were created to be, and to fully mature in that, will that have an effect on our physical being? Yeah, I think so. And I think the light and everything that our consciousness is supposed to engage with, or has the ability to engage with, all of that I think is part of being able to live in multiple realms and function there, and all of them interact, you know. So, you know, without actually asking her exactly what she means by celestial body, you know, I'm sort of just extrapolating what I think she could mean, or what there could mean from a celestial body, you know.
So when we go up to heaven, or we're already there, our bodies look different, right, when we're up there than down here, our physical bodies. So because I know
it is a physical body, isn't it? It's not a physical body that you're there in. Your physical body is designed for this realm. And when Adam had an original physical body, it was surrounded by his spiritual body that enabled his physical body to travel in different dimensions.
So could that be the celestial body?
Well, possibly so. But I don't, at this point in time, when I'm in that realm, my physical body's not going.
Right.
Yeah, but my soul is going, and my spirit, and joining my spirit. So I'm consciously aware of that realm. And when I see myself in that realm, I'm not seeing myself. I've learned not to see myself effectively from the memory of what I look like here. So, some people would say, your physical appearance there, or the way you look, we're just trying to describe something which is spiritual in a physical way, is how much, because the spiritual realm is just as real as the natural realm. It just functions on a different physics, if you like. If I'm there spiritually, I used to see myself as I remembered I am here, but I don't anymore. Because the more I spent time there and just being there, the more the light that I am, or the representation of that light, is more what I perceive. But most of the time I'm there first person. So I'm not really looking down to see what I look like. You know what I mean? I'm just doing stuff. But sometimes there is a sense where, I've had my hand held, and there is a sense where this is how you relate to that realm, because, are they physically holding my hand? Well, it's pretty much irrelevant ultimately, because I'm feeling my hand held. Now, whether a spirit can hold a spirit's hand is the way it's a description of something that means something, rather than, it necessarily, having to be exactly that. So I think things are representative of, but it's easier to relate to it if it's relating to a grid of reference that you've got. If I had to relate to it in terms of some quantum entanglement of particles between my spirit and someone else's spirit, which potentially it is, it would be a bit odd, because we don't do that stuff here. So you would then have to sort of try and find a way of engaging that, and it would be, oh, I'm holding someone's hand. So you might as well perceive it as holding someone's hand in the first place, even though it probably has a deeper spiritual and scientific basis to it in that way. But hey, I mean, it's what we will be in the ages to come, who knows? And I think there must be a restoration to what God originally intended, and a progression from what he originally intended to what could be. Because if we were not perfected, then the original intent was only the beginning, not the end. So I believe we're going to get restored back to the beginning, to then follow where that will lead, rather than taking a shortcut, which wasn't a shortcut, but was a diversion down our own path. So if Adam originally was connected to heaven and earth and could walk with God in the various gardens, because his spirit was able to encompass his body, then I believe we will have that capacity once again. In some sense, I'm practicing that now by actually looking to overshadow my soul body with my spiritual boundary, if you like, and seeing that atmosphere permeated with what's flowing out of heaven and flowing through me. So I'm looking to see the boundaries of my spirit extend over areas that I have responsibility for, my physical being. And I'm looking to release rivers of living water, or light, or whatever an analogy you want to use, or frequency, into that atmosphere around me, so that that atmosphere then can expand. Now it can expand spiritually, in that there's no boundary in the spirit, so I can engage all of my family wherever they would be in the world, or all of the Joshua generation wherever they are in the world. It's not limited by that type of dimension. But where I walk physically, then I do believe that I need to be aware of where I'm walking and what I'm carrying, and like Peter's shadow, healing somebody because they had an energy field which carried with it, in terms of the energy to heal, as Jesus did. People touched him and drew power from him to heal, to be healed, because they were touching into that energy field. And I think the same as us, we can develop an energy field which is supposed to bring life wherever we go, if we have a flow that's coming through us into this physical realm, and to create a spiritual dimension around us that it can be touched by others and felt and experienced and, benefited by, ultimately. So we're in process. So, what we will be, we'll become, and it's quite difficult to decide what that will be, because it's becoming, rather than we've got other than Jesus as a model, we don't really have much else other than going back and seeing what Adam did, or looking at it. But we're still then looking at it from the mindset that we carry, which needs interpreting what we see. And that's the problem when you see something that you've never seen before. How do you frame it? In what way did you interpret it? So I could go back and look at Adam and I'll be like, whoa, what am I looking at? Am I looking at light? Am I looking at a physical form shimmering in light? What is it? What did he look like? And what he looked like is going to be interpreted by what I see from my grid of reference all the time. And that grid of reference can be shifted by experiencing other things, and the more I think we experience God and those dimensions the more we can then relate to things. So, some of the Old Testament scriptures, which were freaky stuff like Ezekiel and all that stuff, was trying to describe, the wheels within wheels, and, beings with wings and foreheads, and, all of that type of thing. And there is a sort of perspective of, yes, that engagement, he recorded, and it was something that he could obviously relate to in some way, because he related it in a physical way. But there's also other completely dimensional perspectives to that, which he didn't have a clue about, or if he did have a clue about it, he couldn't describe, because he didn't have the words to describe it. So the Merkaba and all of that type of thing, of a gateway or a portal, or an overlap or an interaction between heaven and earth that opens a portal, or to help us connect to energy, because the wheels within wheels were energy, an energy source, if you like. So the Merkaba enables us to connect to the energy, 0 point energy, which is in the fabric of creation, and draw from it, so we can be energized from what we can't see. Now, how do you get that from the wheels within wheels within wheels and what he described? Quite difficult, because he's trying to describe something in words that you didn't see. So people draw it in all sorts of different ways, and they do their best to describe what they think that he's seeing. But of course, they're only describing what they are seeing from what the words say. So you get all these geometric perspectives, as well as the physical perspective, which also has an interactive meaning with it, And I think the more you begin to engage in the sort of weird stuff of heaven, the more that stuff becomes a little bit more familiar, and the easier it is to interact. And, I don't do a Nancy Cohen Merkaba exercise to draw energy. I do it from my consciousness to activate, drawing the energy I need from a realm which is limitless into this realm which is limited. So I want to be limitless in this realm from a limitless supply in another realm. And I consciously draw from that. I don't necessarily make the sounds to activate that. I use my mind to activate it. But my mind and thoughts are frequency that are vibrating. They're just not actually audible, but they still are vibrating frequencies of energy. So I can activate it using my consciousness. I'm not saying that you can't activate it using sound. And when Nancy Cohen did that exercise at the Restoration of All Things conference, it was like people were like line dancing, really. But actually, you know, it had a activating way, because your physical body was interacting and you were making the sounds or frequencies that were going from low to high to take you into a different realm. You know, I just don't do it that way, you know. And actually she doesn't do it that way either. She said, you know, she doesn't actually do the line dancing bit, but she does do the sound bit, you know, because in a sense that works for her, you know. And it worked, you know, it does work. I mean, when I got home after that evening, I was wired. I mean, it was like I was electrified by doing it that way, but I didn't need to be electrified, and so I couldn't go to sleep. So I was like 2 o'clock in the morning, I was at home, like thinking, you know, I could go out and run a marathon or something, but what will be the point? So in the end, I forced myself to go to bed and rested and went and drifted off to sleep. But I didn't need it. You know what I mean? Because I'd come to the end of my day and I'd fulfilled everything I was supposed to do. So, hey, I didn't need that energy then. So, you know, it's not ideal doing an activation exercise at the end of the day when you don't need the energy, you know. So, you know, but I did feel it and I sensed it. And I believe that you can activate and draw. I just do it a different way. You know, but I think all of those things are interactive and ways in which we can engage. So for some, the Merkaba is a chariot that takes them off into other dimensions. And they see it as a chariot. They see it with wheels, and, you know, I've got friends who that's how they see it. You know, others would see it as the power source that's moving their throne around the universe. I mean, there's all sorts of different perspectives, you know. I just sort of don't really need a image of something to operate in it. I've just learned to do this as a part of life. So I don't really picture something, you know, I just do it. I engage it. But I used to picture, you know, stepping through the doorway or engaging in that way. Now I'm just connected. So my soul joins my spirit. I don't have to go through a door. In reality, it is a door. It's an opening, you know, or a wormhole, whichever way, you know, there's all sorts of descriptions, you know, that's taking you from one dimension to another dimension. And you can then become conscious of the other dimension. I just have to think and do, you know, it's quite simple, you know, whereas when I practice and practice and practice, I used to practice thinking about the open door, the invitation to come up here, perhaps the steps of Jacob's ladder that you could walk up in, you know, all of those things were just helpful because they were things that got me familiar with the path, to then that path becomes just automatic when I just activate it, you know. And I think the same thing with lots of different perspectives. We start one way to activate and we end up being able to do it pretty much instinctively without having to go through that thing. Same with our gateways or anything else, you know. When I would initially engage them, I walk through them all with Jesus. I would consciously engage, seeing the flow through them all. Now it just flows, you know. I don't even have to think about it. It's just flowing because I activated it and activated it and activated it, and it's flowing. You know, so I don't have to do the things that I would teach other people to do now, and hopefully they won't have to do those things other than if they get into a rut and a ritual. And that's the danger of doing things by formula. It can become ritualistic. So, you know, if someone finds saying Yod Hey Vav Hey to enter in works, that's great. But that might not necessarily be the way you have to do it forever. You know, because once you've activated and once you've learned to go in, then it becomes more of a reality of how you live. But it's quite difficult when people are all at different stages. So to say, I will be talking like Lindy is, oh, well, let's just do it, you know, because I can just do it. But I know not a lot of people can't just do it. So it helps to say, hey, picture an open door and a ladder, and by faith walk through the ladder and go through the open door, because there's something to connect to.
So on the Nest now, they're starting to teach Hebrew lessons so that you can actually speak and know Hebrew. And one of my friends, she seems to think that she needs to know Hebrew to enter into heaven and stuff.
Okay.
Whereas,
I mean, for me, I don't need to know Hebrew, Greek, or any other language, because God speaks to me in English.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have an issue with people engaging living letters and all of that. It's just not how I do it. You know, I'm engaging in a face-to-face encounter. I don't want another third party getting in the way as a mediator. And for me, living letters could be a mediator if I'm not engaging God directly. If God led me to go and engage a living letter for some particular reason, then that will be fine. But he never has, so I never have. So for me, it's just not something that's part of my life in that way. And, you know, learning Hebrew, to me, is not something I would want to do or feel I would even need to do. Because I'm not Hebrew, and neither is God. Bottom line is, that's, the reality is, this is an old covenant language. I don't want to live in the old covenant. I'm just not interested in any of that type of thing, because I don't want to live in an old covenant perspective. Part of the two pillars of my mind that needed deconstructing were Greek and Hebrew thought, because a lot of what people are learning is not old Hebrew of the Old Testament. It's modern day Hebrew, and it's changed over the years a lot. And I'm just not into any of the Hebrew Israel stuff at all, because I want to live in the new covenant, one new man in Christ, and I don't want to be tied to another form which has faded away. The old covenant is faded away. It's no longer in force. So why would I want to learn the language of the old covenant? Now you could say, oh, it's the language of God. Well, I don't think God's got a language other than love. He communicates with us in the way that we can connect. And if you want to connect with him in Hebrew, great. But you're never going to learn Hebrew like someone who was born 4,000 years ago, who would understand what the Hebrew picture language meant and the stories and everything else. It isn't going to happen today. So for me, it would be a waste of time for me doing it. But I'm not. If people want to do it, people are free to do it. And people will make a lot of money trying to teach them how to do it.
Yeah, but they say that there's secrets and revelations with you learning it.
Yeah, but don't we have access directly to God, who can tell us all the secrets and revelation he wants us to know? Why do you need to? It's the same as going through the Zohar or, any of those mystic books. Why would I want to go through another book? I'm not even wanting to go through the Bible, let alone go through another book or another language to engage with another story that I got to reinterpret? Why? You see, to me, this again goes back to going back to this mystery stuff. And actually, God wants to unveil the mysteries, not try and take us deeper. And I know people like Dr. O and all those people, oh yeah, there's all these mysteries within the Bible, blah, 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 blah. Well, great. You know, if they want to go into Bible codes and all that stuff, they're happy. I'm happy for them to do it. I don't need to do it. Because if God wants to know me to know something, he'll tell me. And if he tells me to read something, then I'll read it. But I'm not going to do it because I think this will help me get an understanding of mysteries, that God can't talk to me in English. If he wants me to know something, it doesn't make any sense to me. You know, because it would very much be a backward step. When I've learned to communicate with him face to face, heart to heart, I don't want to go through another mediation, and another language to me would be a mediation. You know, now those who already know that stuff, Dr. O, who comes from a Jewish background and all of that, then God is likely to talk to him through things like that, because that's things he understands. You know, God speaks to me through science. He speaks to me through things that I'm related to, you know, but I wouldn't go and study science so he could speak to me through it. I already know quite a bit of science, so he speaks to me through it because I know it. So he uses what I already know to show me more. He doesn't want me to learn something so I can communicate with him. He communicates to me direct. You know, and some people, you know, have different things that they're into, and God will speak to them through those different things. But he doesn't necessarily means you have to go and get a university degree in that so that you can better understand God. God is just trying to communicate, and he'll use the media that we are most familiar with to communicate with us. For me, that's not Hebrew, and therefore he's not going to ask me to go and learn Hebrew, because it will be an irrelevance, you know. Okay, so he's basically saying, would engaging living letters be the same as engaging wisdom? Yeah, but God told me to engage wisdom, so I did, you know. And wisdom sometimes engages me. So if a living letter came along and started talking to me, I wouldn't turn my back and walk away. I would engage it, because it'd be like, okay, why has God sent you? Because sometimes God sends messengers, whether they be angels or cloud of witnesses. He does. And I've no problem with engaging with a cloud of witness, because God will send them, or on assignment or whatever. But I wouldn't look to go and engage with one of the cloud of witnesses as a way of engaging God. Primarily, I want to engage God direct. But if he wants to communicate in some other way, I'm very happy for him to do so. But I want to maintain the face-to-face intimacy. You know, it's just, he's never used living letters to me, so I don't have any testimony of it. You know, but when it then gets linked to I need to learn all about Hebrew for those living letters to communicate to me. I don't need to learn all about wisdom for wisdom to communicate to me. Having a relationship with her is great, because God designed her to have a relationship with us. And if the living letters are designed to have a relationship with us, that's great. None of them have ever sought me out for a relationship, and God has never introduced me to any. So for me, it just doesn't seem to be something that he does. The same as he doesn't speak to me through numbers and, well, you know, 111s and 222s on clocks and all those things. I don't get any of that, but he definitely does with other people, and they get it all the time. But for me, that isn't something that I relate to, because it's never happened. You know, I've never actually seen 111 on a clock face, or 222. I've never seen it ever. So it's just not where I am. And I think we all got to be free to be us. And if someone wants to learn Hebrew thinking they're going to find mysteries, well, okay, that's fine. You know, it's going to take them a long time, you know, and, you know, again, you know, when I'm looking at the Old Testament, if God wants to speak to me through the Old Testament, he will, but primarily he doesn't anymore, you know. So yeah, it's one of those things which I think is the latest fad that people will probably go through, pay a load of money, learn a load of stuff, and find out that they know no more than when they started in reality. Because ultimately, I don't believe that's the key to the mysteries of God. Knowing Hebrew, Greek, or any other language is face-to-face engaging God is the key. If they spent more time in intimacy with the Father as they did learning Hebrew, then they would get way more out of that than learning Hebrew. You know, because how much time are they going to spend learning a language when they could be talking to the God who communicates? So, and I think that's the same with anything else. And that's why I don't study the Bible or spend my time doing all that, because I'd much rather hang out with God and hang out with the living word rather than try and fathom out the written word, which I don't understand a lot of in reality, because most of it wasn't written for me. But my relationship with God was designed for me, you know, in that way. Now, I don't want to dishonor those who teach Hebrew or whatever. That's fine. And those that have insight that they give people that opens up revelation for them, you know, I know that there are quite a number of people who are doing that. Awesome. You know, and that's not a problem to me. It's just, it's not where I am and what I feel I need to do. You know, and I remember listening to Carl Whitehead talk about the Hebrew letters that make up the word shalom, peace. And he described breaking down the individual letters and the numerology of it, you know, the gematria thing. And he sort of broke down the pictures, and, you know, each thing had a picture towards it. And he expressed this beautiful thing of peace, and it was lovely. And as I was listening to it, I thought, this actually sounds quite familiar. And then I went back into my journals, and about 3 weeks earlier, God actually said virtually identically, word for word, the same thing to me face to face. So I thought, hey, God can speak to me and give me that sort of revelation without me having to go and unpack, breaking down every Hebrew letter and the pictures that those letters represent in a word. I mean, can you imagine how long it would take to go through every word in the Old Testament and break it all down for God to speak to you? You'd never spend any time with him. You spend all your time actually studying to break it all down and figure it all out. And it's really interesting. Don't get me wrong. You know, it's like, yeah, well, that's really interesting, but I'd rather actually just hang out with God more than just spending time studying anything to try and find out more about someone I can hang out with and trust he'll show me what he wants me to know. So, you know, I journal all our conversations and what he says and what we do and what he shows me. That for me is all I need. You know, and if there's anything else, he'll show me. You know, and that simplifies it all a little bit and takes the mystery out of it, because it, you know, there's a sense of the mystery is there to pursue. I understand. But that was, a lot of that was Old Covenant. You know, God has hidden things for things to look at. Well, Jesus unveiled things so we could see them. So I think Jesus is the express image of everything, of who God is, to unveil and reveal him and bring the light into it. I don't want to go back into the mysteries that were in an old way of doing, the shadows and types and all that, when I can engage the reality. So, you know, I don't want that to come over as harsh. It's just, you know, this, I wouldn't want to be encouraging people to learn Hebrew when they could talk to God. You know, and, you know, they would, for me, benefit so much more from spending that amount of time with God. You know, and it's funny, isn't it, that people are willing to do all that and maybe not spend the time with God? Is that not sort of a pathway of the knowledge of good and evil, or the DIY path? I'm going to do all this so I can get that, rather than, hey, I'm just going to enter into this amazing relationship and enjoy it. You know, but anyway.
Mike, do you think children ascend to heaven?
I think children's spirits are active, engaging in all sorts of different things. And when they're little, before they've had a chance to had a lot of stuff taught out of them, or, you know, put off limits by education systems, I think they are more perceptive than afterwards. And so I do think they perceive things. You know, you have obviously when all the Toronto stuff was going on, you had kids who were talking about seeing angels dropping cotton wool and all this stuff on people. You know, their way of describing something, they could see it when other people couldn't. You know, so I do think they are more likely to be sensitive and being able to engage. I don't think it's probably an active engaging in heaven, perhaps like we would do, because they have probably not been framed cognitively around that. But if you do that with your children or grandchildren, they would be able to do it. You know, it's not that they can't do it, but do we spend the time helping them do it? Do they do it instinctively? Maybe their spirit does. I'm not so sure that their soul does, because their soul is still tied to cognitive knowledge. I mean, it may be that those who are very spiritually aware may discover and find these things are open to them. I don't know. You know, I do think children find it very easy to be able to engage when they're at an age, until they get self-conscious and self-aware, and peer pressure and all the other stuff comes on, and all the educational stuff, which is teaching them logic and language and everything else.
Do you do it with your grandchildren?
Yeah, I've used sort of Helen Tave's books, you know, Jacob's Ladder and the Courts and whatever, you know, a little bit. And I think, you know, the more you can do that, the more they will find it easier to maintain that. It's easier really with a consistent approach that parents can give, rather than, you know, how often we see our grandchildren in terms of sleepovers and things where we could spend that much time with them. You know, it's probably slightly less, obviously, than they have with their parents. You know, but we'd certainly be looking to encourage them spiritually, and I'm always overshadowing them with a view of calling out their destiny and, you know, engaging with their angels and that type of thing. But I would have definitely done things differently with my children if I had known what I know now back then. You know, just didn't.
Like, sometimes you use the word resonance. It does not resonate with me.
Yeah.
Is this the intuitive capacity that we have to discern? Or is it a product of the soul, or both?
Well, resonance is a musical term, a scientific term, that's really about two different frequencies coming together, where the lower frequency is entrained to a higher frequency, which is what happens with resonance. And that can be very powerful. It can be intuitive in that, as you say, I don't resonate with that. It doesn't sort of connect with me, is what I'm trying to say. And my spirit doesn't vibrate well with that frequency. So you can get some things which are attracting, two forces which attract, and you can get the same things which repel. So, you know, you think of a magnet, and you put the poles together and they repel, or the opposite poles attract. And I think it's a little bit like that. Sometimes your spirit connects to something and it just is attracted to it, and you feel whoa, there's something in this, I'm going to find and pursue it. And other times it's just like, no, and the same thing would be, I don't particularly resonate with, Hebrew language, or any, I don't resonate with it. It isn't doing anything to connect me in my spirit at this moment in time. So I think there's a higher principle to it, in that the closer we get to the frequency of God, then the more we entrain to be like him. So that's what happens. So the more our spirit spends time with God, the more our soul begins to interact with that resonance. So you can have an interaction which is non-cognitive, that's going on all the time by living in the presence of God, that because our soul and spirit are connected, quantumly entangled, my soul can be affected by what my spirit's doing instantly all the time. Then if my soul is in a cooperation and agreement with my spirit, then my soul resonates with what my spirit's doing and comes into alignment, and I'm one. If my soul is in contradiction to what my spirit's doing, then I get the tension and resistance of repelling that. That's what independence does. It repels what the spirit's doing to maintain its own frequency and to not come into alignment. When we surrender, we're surrendering to those higher frequencies to come into alignment, to resonate with them. And it's what happens. And I felt that happen when my soul and spirit were separated, reintegrated. It felt totally different. And my soul was then just continually being entrained to what my spirit was doing. Now, when your soul and spirit go together, then there is that connection, harmony that you get by doing something in oneness. But you can be one even though you're not doing something together when you're connected. So I do think we need to develop those discerning senses that would become tuned to things. Now, that's not to say that I might be repelled by something which is good. It may not just be good for me at this season in my life, or it may not be good for me because that's not part of my destiny. So some things, it's not that I'm repelled by them because I'm wrong. It's just my spirit is not resonating with them because it's not the time, season, or never will be. And that's okay. That's why we've got to be careful that we don't say that someone else is wrong. They're just doing what they're doing. Maybe because they do resonate with that, and for them that makes total sense. But for someone else, you can see the same thing and it doesn't make total sense. Which is why, we can have these different viewpoints, and it's okay to have those different viewpoints. So I want to discern what's right for me in my relationship with God, and be careful that then I don't try and do something which is right for someone else because they're a particular celebrity or they're a particular gift, and they may not be me, or I might never need that. So I don't need to try and be like anybody else. So I want to be discerning to pursue that which is going to enhance who I am and help me to mature and to grow, and not waste time on that which isn't. So sometimes people send things to me and I'm like, not in the slightest bit interested. I'm sure they're thrilled by what they heard or listened to or what they're showing me. I'm just not interested in the slightest because something in me just says, I'm not interested. Other things people send and I'm like, whoa, that's really interesting. Where did that come from? What's that about? And because my spirit and soul are interested because there's something that I connect to in it. And we are on a journey. So it may be that next year I will connect to something different than I'm connecting this year. And that's okay.
Mike, you were saying while you were talking earlier this morning that when you're doing things that you're not necessarily looking to see So are you flowing more in thought and impression?
Well, no, I'm just seeing with my spiritual eyes, which isn't which not a visual format. You know, it's like being somewhere and becoming aware that you're somewhere. So like my soul, and I mean, I'm engaged here and I'm talking to you, and my attention is on here. Now I could then tune into something of the spiritual realm around what we're doing and see into that realm if I chose to. And then I could engage with something spiritually, perhaps your angels or other things that are in that realm. If my spirit is engaging with God, then, and I become aware of it, then I'm then coming into the sense of awareness of what I'm doing anyway. And that's how it works for me. I can, that information is then available to me as a flow of thought or information, you know. It isn't something then I'm going to try and see, because I'm there, you know. And if I'm talking to you and I'm looking at you and I'm then going to connect to where my spirit is, I'm still looking at you. So the visual information, which is coming to my physical senses, is still visual because I'm looking at you. But now I'm also connected to a flow of other sort of information from my spirit. So I don't need to know what my spirit's doing until I need to know what my spirit's doing. So then I just tune to it and I can describe it to you, but I'm not seeing it in the visual sense, but I'm perceiving it just as clearly in the spiritual sense. And I can describe the throne or the angel or whatever, and it can be a very visual description. I'm just not seeing it, you know. So the same thing would be, let's say you take an image on your digital camera, you know, and you want that image to be seen on the computer. So you have to transfer the image that's on the digital camera to the computer in one way or another. Now, years ago, that used to sort of have a cable that you connected to your camera and you connected to your computer, USB cable, and then you downloaded the file that went up that cable in the form of some sort of electrical impulses, which are ones and zeros. And then at the other end, your computer was able to take that ones and zeros and turn it back into the file, which was the image, which you click on and you can see. So if you learn the ones and zeros, then you don't have to have the image to know. It's just the same information in a different form, isn't it? And now you can do the same by Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. You don't even need a hard wire to connect your camera to the computer. It just is transmitted by Wi-Fi signal. So again, what is that? It's still information that's being passed, and it's still ones and zeros. It's just now being passed not on a physical data link, but on a non-physical, you could say spiritual, in that way. So spiritually, my spirit can communicate to my soul through an information of spiritual ones and zeros that I've learned to interpret. And I don't need the image either end in that way for me to be there. If I was to describe it to you, then I need the image that I'm going to take the ones and zeros and say to you, this looks like this. There's a throne and a crown and a thing, and there's an angel and there's this. And so I'm taking the ones and zeros, and now I'm turning it into something that you can perceive. If you learn to understand my ones and zeros, then you could actually discern the same thing that I'm seeing, but you can't. But I do believe it's possible that we will be able to communicate in those sorts of ways when we learn that spiritual language, and we are able to pick up each other's Wi-Fi signals, if you like, and connect. And I do believe that will become possible, because maybe the grid system and the internet system that we have at the minute may not be there forever in that way. So we may have to communicate in different ways. So it sort of helps to have a way of looking at it like that, which gives you sort of the insight, you know. So I could, you know, have an image at either end, or just the information that for me is just the same as the image. Because information is information, regardless of which form it's in, so long as you know what it means. So some people who are very, very skilled in mathematical things, some people like savants and people like that, could look at a series of ones and zeros and actually tell you what it means. I guess computer programmers are seeing a whole pattern of language, which then forms things which is very different from the language that we look at it. It looks gobbledygook, a whole load of terms that we don't understand unless you know the different languages, you know, whatever they are now. I mean, years ago, it used to be BASIC and, you know, Fortran and all sorts of different things that you look at it, and I look at it and think, I have no idea what that means. I didn't understand the language, and I could look at it, someone else would look at it and say, that's this. And I think it's the same spiritually. You know, we can tune and engage in a way that brings us the perception of that reality. You know, people just strive to try and see all the time. You know, that's they try and see, and actually the flow may be coming in a different format, and they're missing it because they're trying to see, because they're trying to think it's an image, rather than it's information, it's communication, and it's a flow. So tune into the flow, and then that's the key. At the end of the day, it's really coming to a point of perceiving the reality of that flow and knowing. So, you know, I know what my spirit is doing. It's a knowing information, which most of the time I don't need to try and interpret in any other way, because I know. It's only if I'm trying to communicate to someone else who doesn't know that I have to use a different form of communication, often in words or images. You know, because I know what God said to me. For you to know what God said to me, I've got to tell you, or he's got to tell you. So I can use words to tell you, or I could tell you in a picture, or I could show you a picture, so that you would know what I know. You know? And we all need to sort of tune into the way in which we're wired to know and to experience, and that may be different for others. You know, I think there's differences of opinion on the issue of seeing and hearing and knowing. You know, you've got the Ian Clayton camp, who would be very much, if you can't see it, then you can't have it. An emphasis on that's a visual seeing. And you've got Dr. O, I saw the other day, put out a thing to say, hey, hearing is much more important than seeing. You know, and, you know, are they contradictory? Maybe not. It just depends on what they were trying to communicate, you know, and knowing, seeing isn't just visual, you know, perception is not just visual. So clearly, yes, we need to perceive something for us to be able to engage it, but that doesn't have to be a purely visual image perception. It can be a knowing perception just as powerfully in that sense, you know, and I think it would help people just to relax, and if they just tried to be and learn to tune their senses into the flow that God is communicating them with. You know, it's no point tuning into AM if he's communicating on FM band, you know, and, you know, that might be the case. People are trying to tune into something that they weren't designed to be able to connect to, and therefore feel frustrated and struggle all the time, rather than just relax. Learn to meditate and be mindful and see what comes out of that communication and tune into it, and then focus on that. Yeah. So. You know, it's quite funny when you watch speakers and they're main speakers and they're in the same environment. It's quite interesting just watching how they interact with one another. And when one of them says something that they thought, oh, that might appear that I'm being negative towards somebody else, and they're not, but they're just saying it in a way. And sometimes they're like, then backtrack or try and reframe it because they don't want to offend, because that's the way it is, you know. And I think we just need to be free to be us and to express things the way we express them, but to be aware that other people express them differently, and that's okay as well.